Could the Dallas Cowboys find their replacement for Tyron Smith in round 1 of the 2024 draft? All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked on Cowboys. Locked on Cowboys.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That is $200 if your bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. And on today's show, we're going to be breaking down some first-round offensive tackles. So at least we think first-round offensive tackles that could be of interest to the Dallas Cowboys now that Tyron Smith is officially gone and playing for the New York Jets. I want to start with the player that I've been calling the most interesting player in the draft, and that's Amarius Mims from Georgia. Landon, I know that you just got done watching the tape. What did you think about this giant that plays on the right side for Georgia?
Well, you said it. The first note I have is enormous monster. That was the first note in my notes. Almost 6'8", 340 pounds plus, with 36-inch arms, 11-inch hands, and almost an 87-inch wingspan. Now, I'm going to pause real quick here because we are going to talk about two different guys in this pod who are considered to be upside athlete type, offensive tackles, right? Like guys that are developmental, like, God, look at that athleticism. What could we do with that ball of clay type of guys, right? But the difference in physical proportions and athleticism between the two, I think, is pretty massive. And I want to just kind of point out exactly what Mims has accomplished, right? I mean, besides being in the kind of 90th percentile for height, 94th percentile for this all per mock draftable, 94th percentile for weight. He has the 97th percentile for wingspan, 95th percentile. He has 36 and 1/8 inch arms, right? And huge hands. And he had a 111-inch broad jump. So he's an explosive, long-armed, big offensive tackle who can really move. And he's clearly powerful. You watch that in this game. He's an incredible mover for his size, but not necessarily overall for the position. And I think that's where I wanted to kind of get at with the kind of particulars here is it's incredible to watch this man monster rumble around the field and run 40s and move around. And it's impressive to watch, right? But the results, like, when compared to a normal sized upper tier offensive tackle, there is still a difference, right? So even though he is an incredible mover for his size, ultimately it kind of washes out to about, average for offensive tackles, right? Like, I mean, I think above average, but still, I mean, considering his size, it's pretty impressive. And I think that kind of indicates where his upside is there, right? Like,
well, look, I'm going to compare it to Tyron Smith because we're talking about Tyron, right?
Yeah.
So Tyron had 36-inch arms with 11-inch hands. Again, Mims is right there with him. Tyron ran a 5.08 40-yard dash at 307 pounds. Again, very, very impressive. We're talking about.
We were also shocked that Tyron made it to 307 pounds by the time that his it was amazing that he had gotten above 300 pounds.
Because we thought he would be like 298 or right at 300, right?
Absolutely.
This guy ran a faster 40-yard dash at 40 pounds heavier.
Yeah.
40 pounds. And we talk about how big Tyron's hands are. Mims are bigger, which is absolutely insane.
Yeah, he has over 11 inches of change hands, and you see all of that, right? You see and he's flexible. You see in his pass set, in his stance he can get low, so he has the kind of flexibility. He has explosion. You can see it if you watch him on screens. You watch him working to the second level. You can see that kind of explosion and flexibility he has. The problem I have with this game is that the developmental part has not gotten to his pass set yet. No. To me, his pass set needs more reps because he is this explosive athlete, which has been proven out like in several different ways, but it doesn't translate to his pass set. He doesn't look natural. He looks like he needs just more reps at doing it, which I think plays out because he hasn't played a bunch of reps. His power is definitely covering some of the holes, technical holes in his games. In his game, he'll badly overset, but will be able to recover by punishing the pass rushers he come across as his face with a devastating punch. That may not work as well in the NFL, where these guys are a lot bigger and more powerful and more explosive. Despite being insanely long, this is kind of the opposite of remember when I talked about Jordan Morgan and how he has short arms, but somehow he doesn't waist bend. He has the opposite problem. He punches late and he gets pushed back. Mims is on the other side of it, right? He's got vines for arms, but you still see him get out over his skis too often. He bends at his waist. And I think with him, it's because he is leaning too much into his blocks. He's trying to destroy players as opposed to doing a solid punch and then continuing his job. He's trying to bury guys and he's getting too overzealous and it's knocking him over. And he ends up being on the ground way too much, which is a problem sometimes with these top heavy guys that are big. He doesn't have a ton of snaps, but has decent eye discipline for that. I mean, there are aspects of his game that are very well developed considering he has not played a ton of snaps. But there are definitely aspects, like I talked about, that he just needs more reps, like taking his pass set, pulling away from the line of scrimmage, moving backwards. That's where I feel like, his athleticism hasn't translated into his technique yet. And that to me reads as needing more reps. Where does he win? I had forgotten I had written this report a couple of weeks again. I wrote some of these reports early on and then came back and redid the notes and went over it. I put down originally and I decided not to change it. Where does he win? He's basically the mountain from Game of Thrones.
Yes.
So I imagine him winning by pressing the eyes of the viper of what's his name, and it's so that's where he wins. And then unanswered questions are. I think we've seen a couple of these types of players come into the league already, and it's been real hit and miss, right? Even the guys that we feel like are sure bets at times because of their athleticism, their strength, and their skills, it doesn't always, translate perfectly. Is he going to be able to get the reps he needs to kind of get the comfort level to be more consistent? I think that's really the issue, is you need him to be more consistent. And, how much more physically dominant can he be in the run game? There are times when you see him out there and he's like on the move, he's on the hoof, he's dominating linebackers to the second level when he gets to them. But is he, how often are you seeing him physically push the pocket, being the tip of the spear in the run game? And how are you going to be able to unlock all that power in the run game as a point of attack block?
Yeah, so you've mentioned that we've seen some of these type of offensive linemen enter the NFL, at least in the last few years. By the way, Mims isn't even the heaviest tackle in this class. JC Latham, who's going to be a first-round pick, is like 2 pounds heavier, which is crazy. We've seen guys like Mekhi Becton, who very similar, great athlete coming out of Louisville, but struggled to stay healthy, right?
That's right.
I almost compare him more to Dawan Jones, who went in the 4th round last year from Ohio State, who was the same thing. It was 6'7", 350 pounds. It's strange to me because I think Mims is a better pass blocker than a run blocker right now. And I think it's because while he's straight line fast, he's almost too big to get out and make to make blocks in space. And you see that, like, smaller guys can kind of run around him a little bit and beat him to spots. So that would be my concern. The other issue is the injuries. You and I were talking pre-show. He's only played 5 games in his entire college career that had 40 or more snaps. He was constantly leaving games or didn't start in games, only 8 career starts. Like, we just got done going through this, like, hey, we don't have a reliable left tackle. We're always wondering about his health. I do wonder if the Cowboys would be a little bit wary of doing that again because the snaps are so small.
Yeah, it's tough with a lot of these Planet players, and Tyron doesn't necessarily. I mean, he does fall into that, but in kind of a different way, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he's just a rare athlete for a 300-pound person, right? This guy's a rare physical being. Like, there just aren't very many 6'8", 340-pound people. Period.
Move like
Much
this. Yeah.
football players, and I the movements and everything that's required to play the sport, right? Like, I think there's some kind of physiological issue at a certain point where you can become too large and too explosive, and you're practically tearing your own muscles off your bone when you're doing some of these pass sets or when you're exerting yourself with that much power, right? So
the hope is I gotta believe the
Let-
hope is like Orlando Brown, who was the current left tackle for the Bengals, or
yeah.
frankly the right tackle now, Trent Brown, like one of those two players. Like, I think that's what you're hoping to get here with Mims.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, it certainly is possible. It just seems like these bigger tackles, despite having, a clear physical advantage at times, the ones that are athletic enough to, to be good movers and be, valuable, they tend to get hurt a lot because of just, I think, like I said, I think the physics of it is just like, it's tough on these bodies. So if you find a guy that's got an injury history, it's a little concerning, because it's like, I don't know that that's going to get better in the NFL necessarily, especially for a guy like Mims, who was at Georgia, which is, top program in the nation. It's not like they're going to have a bad training staff necessarily. So, it's a little concerning.
All right, let's switch gears to another offensive tackle that is completely different from Amarius Mims. It's Troy Fautanu from Washington. We will get to him next. This episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. It's what brings home the winning trophy, and it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We want to let you know that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel, Locked On Sports Today. Baseball fans, mark your calendars for March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern. That's tonight, for the best MLB season preview, coming exclusively to Locked On Sports Today on March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern. Be the first to get local insights from the MLB local experts of the Locked On Podcast Network. Find it on March 20th at 7 p.m. Eastern on the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. All right, Landon, let's talk about Troy Fautanu. Just put Fatano. I want to make sure I get that right, because somebody pointed out yesterday. What were your thoughts?
Pointing out me, because I was the one who was actually butchering the name over and over and over.
We just want to make sure everybody gets it right.
Yeah.
Very, very different from Mims. What did you see on his tape?
Yeah, Fee-Fi Fo Fatanu is, as the guy, is the way I'm trying to remember it. He is very, very different than Mims, right? Mims being absolutely to the sky, stretched out off the tackle. And really, to me, I think Troy has, I'm not going to say his last name again because I'm going to screw it up. I think he has a situation where, like, I think he can play tackle. Like, I think on tape, you watch him, he has some ability. I think we'll get into it a little bit, but I think a lot of the reason that he's being kind of projected as a tackle guard type is that because his body type is an ideal guard body type, right? And but I don't think that can preclude him from playing tackle. He has a shorter torso, but a longer lower half with good arm length. It's a very unusual body type. And actually, I was trying to figure out who he reminded me of, and it's Chuma Edoga. Chuma Edoga has similar arm length, similar, very long legs, shorter torso. And if you look at Udoka, has similar kind of very athletic traits, right? A bigger guy who carries his weight high, who can really move. Like, and I think it has to do with kind of the physiology there. Now, I think, Fatano is a better athlete, a bigger guy, stronger guy than Udoka. But let's also keep in mind that Chuma Udoka, went to USC as an offensive lineman who I'm pretty sure also ran the 100-meter dash in high school. So it's not like he wasn't an athlete. Fatano is exceptional mover with combine testing to prove it. He wears 317 pounds like he's a tight end, right?
Mm-hmm.
Explosive movement paired with excellent side-to-side agility. Feet and hands move explosively and often, right? He's a very kinetic player. He's playing with constant energy. There's no kind of like loaf to his game. It's a constant, full effort, his play temperament is absolutely elite. Like maybe the best in this entire class. And there's a reason that many analysts over and over again talk about the fact that he's their favorite player to watch on tape because he's just plays aggressive. He plays mean. He's never quitting. He's never, taking a play off or taking a snap off. He's always looking for work, which is, again, fantastic to watch. I will say he's more aggressive than he is powerful, right? Like I think he's better at bullying people on the move. But if you're asking him to, like, again, dig out a strong side defensive end or a defensive tackle, it's not necessarily, as clean as you'd expect from a guy with his kind of game, if that makes sense, right? Like I think you view these kind of players as the guys who are also just physically able to dominate guys at the line of scrimmage. And I would say that despite his aggressive nature and his physical mindset, he is more of a finesse type player that likes to be physical than a physical player, I would say. Great body control and balance. The only time you really ever see him on the ground is, and I kind of talked about this with Mims, is when he gets over aggressive, right? Like his balance, like he's not like making moves and tripping over his feet, and he can get over the trash at his feet and all that. He can operate very well. The time that he has problems is when he's trying to go in for a kill and he misses his punch, or he is like really trying to lean in on a guy and the guy, kind of just takes his weight and uses it against him. Going back to the tackle versus guard thing, I think despite his incredible athleticism, he starts to look slower the more isolated he is. So the deeper he gets into his kick step, the less athletic I feel like he looks, right? And which again kind of I think points to and portends a potential move to guard, right? Because I think he looks incredibly athletic, moving side to side. Like if he had players on either side of him, I really have a feeling that no one would be able to get around him because of his incredible back and forth athleticism. But when he's isolated and moving backwards, the more kick slides he does, the more it starts to look uncomfortable for him. And the more he can be kind of susceptible to some of the same things that we talked about with Morgan, where if he stops his feet, guys will get around him quickly. So I do understand the kind of thought of moving him to guard, because I do think it kind of covers up some of that stuff. However, I think he also could work through that and still be a very, very good offensive tackle, a la Rashawn Slater, right? Like,
yes.
Where does he win? Elite athleticism paired with physical mindset. An unanswered question is, I think, what we just talked about. What is his best position? Because I think guard makes some sense. I didn't see it any really of him playing guard, but I think guard makes sense because of his game. But I also think that if you put him in the right situation at right tackle, especially in like a zone blocking scheme, I think he would really, really thrive there as well.
My question was, I didn't love what I saw from him as a run blocker yet. And maybe that was Washington's scheme a little bit. He's not the most overwhelming blocker. I compared him to Jonah Williams, the guy that came out of Alabama.
Okay, yeah. Yeah.
But one of the Jonah Williams' big calling cards coming out of the SEC was, hey, he can play either tackle spot, you can slide him into guard. And Jonah Williams has had a nice career. He actually made himself quite a bit of money as a right tackle this year for the Bengals. But I think if you're looking for like a top 5 or top 10 left tackle, I don't know if that's Fatanu, but I could see him being like an above average starter at 3 different positions. And there's just not very many of those guys out there.
Yeah, I mean, I do think he could be a all pro guard. Like I think he
in the
has
right
that,
scheme. Yes,
in the right scheme, he has that kind of talent. His physicality and his athleticism. I think it just makes a ton of sense. He works really well at the second level. So yeah, I could see him going to, San Francisco or
Miami or the Rams.
Right? Really being a valued interior offensive lineman that can play multiple spots, probably kick out to tackle if you needed him to, and play all those spots. Well, I think, he should settle down into one position and take off there. But I feel like if you needed him to, you could, flex him out wherever you needed if there's an injury or something.
So for the Cowboys, would you rather have Fatano or would you rather gamble on Mims?
I think it's really hard. I think, here's where this is difficult, right? Like, I think all these guys are kind of, and this is just Cowboys talk here. And so Cowboys. If anyone's appearing for draft stuff, I'm sorry. I think these guys are all so closely stacked in like, I think talent, right? That the decision ultimately on some of the stuff might be, how do you feel about Tyler Smith? And where do you feel about playing Tyler Smith? Because if you are set on keeping Tyler Smith at guard, then I think Mims makes a ton of sense, right? Like, because he's a developmental guy. You've got some power there. I think playing on the left side is going to be a little scary because, it's just another thing he hasn't done, and it's a learning curve, right? But if Tyler Smith is still, being considered as a left tackle, man, pairing him next to Fatano would be really something. I really do think that you would get some serious, excellent run blocking, especially in zone scheme stuff. And then pass protection would be really, really stout, especially once you got a center in there. So I think, if things are all kind of staying put where they are, which is kind of where we feel like they are, I probably would pick Mims. But I think if there is some flexibility around Tyler Smith, maybe you consider Fatano.
All right, let's talk about the player at the draft that I have just absolutely zero feel for, and that's Tyler Guyton from Oklahoma, who we will get to next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tournament. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a number 1 seed, it's time to go dancing on America's number 1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That is $200 to use on point spreads, money lines. You can even go bet on who you think is going to win it all. I kind of think UNC on the men's side. And of course, on the women's side, I'm going with Iowa. I just love watching Caitlin Clark. Just visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We are finishing up our first round offensive tackle preview by talking about Tyler Guyton, a player that I cannot figure out. I'm going to read you some stats via Pro Football Focus that I think are interesting. 17th percentile pass block grade and 5 to 7 step concepts. 22nd percentile run block grade on gap runs. 2nd percentile run block grade on zone runs. 5th percentile run blocking negatively graded plays. 21st percentile pass block grades on true pass sets. 42nd percentile pass block grade with play action. 33rd percentile pass block grade versus 3-man rush. And yet I kind of like him. I don't know what to think about Tyler Guyton. I just come away from this tape being like, okay, I can see it.
I'm going to peel back the curtain a little bit. This is freaking crazy. So Marcus and I try not to talk too much about I mean, we'll throw in things and compare notes a little bit, but we try not to talk too much about these guys before we get on the podcast because we like the interaction, right?
Yeah.
Marcus has been talking crap about Guyton for a while now in the DMs and like basically and
I can't figure him out.
And I have too. But what's funny is that this is the first time I've heard you say I kind of like him. And that's kind of the conclusion I came up with last night too.
It's like there's so much that's wrong, but
listen,
I'm like, oh man.
I'm gonna give you a list of all the problems here that I saw because there is problems, and I think part of the issue here, and that's actually why I wanted to point out the Mims thing early, is that I just like I don't view him as this upside project, right? I think that's the problem is that he's being presented to us as this, long-term, huge upside project at offensive tackle. I don't think that that's the case. I think he has a lot higher floor than people are thinking. I also think he has a lot lower ceiling than people are thinking. So, here's the deal with Guyton. He's a tall with long legs, solid build, but he has average length and wingspan. And I think that's kind of the first thing I wanted to point out is that he is an athletic mover. He can move around. There's absolutely that. He's tall and he's big, almost as tall and almost as big as Mims, but he's got almost 2-inch shorter arms, right? And it's like, and that's pretty significant. And it's to the point where it's average, length. Average. So in reality, he's a very athletic tackle. Like that's what he is. That doesn't, and he hasn't played a ton of snaps. That doesn't necessarily mean that he's this huge upside play, right? Because even relative to that, like he's played 1,000 snaps at tackle. Like it's not like he's played like 200 more snaps at tackle than Mims has, right? And I think he has some aspects to his game that are more developed than people are willing to give him credit. Like he moves. Let me just go into my notes. He moves like a basketball player. He has great agility despite his height. He's willingly aggressive, which is, I think, an issue with some of these finesse tackles at times is that, they are told that they need to be aggressive. They told they need to be physical until they try to do their best, but he has the temperament for it. Like he actually, I think, enjoys being physical. I think that goes back to the fact that he used to be a defensive end, right? Isn't he the guy that used to convert defensive end?
Yep.
He gets out of his set well and looks comfy moving backward. No panic. He trusts his athleticism. And I think that's one of the big things between him and Mims that's different, right? Is that this is a guy that despite being also kind of newer to the position and not experienced, he looks comfy in a pass set. He looks comfortable moving backwards. That's not an issue for him. And not only looks comfortable, but he doesn't panic. Right. When guys make moves, you're not seeing him try to adjust his feet and like freak out. He keeps his balance. He keeps his body correct and he continues to move. He has long legs and that helps him cover a lot of ground in his kick slide, which I think because of the long legs and because he's able to cover a lot of ground, he's able to play in his kick slide with a bunch of balance because he's not having to overreach to get long distances to cover speed rushers. Now, the issue I have with him is his punch, right? His punch is a bit of a mess. Like timing and placement have been problematic depending on the situation, especially if he has to reload and punch a second time. He's just likely to miss. He's really bad at in general, he's really bad about kind of marrying his feet and his hands together. So if he has to reload, he'll usually do a punch while he's kind of mid-stride and it'll either miss wide or it just won't have any power to it that he's used to. However, when he marries his feet and his hands together, he can deliver a very serious blow with his initial punch. So the power is there. It can be done. This is a technique and details issue, and that leads me to my other issue with him. His movement skill is elite, so he can stay in front of rushers, but his hands and feet aren't in sync. He can get in close, he can clamp, he can turn defenders, but he's not burying folks. He's not like that kind of strong.
No.
He has good hip flexibility. You can see him sit down in his stance he can sit down low in his stance for such a tall player, but he usually ends the snap with his pad level way too high, like standing fully up. And it's these kind of things. His game overall just needs more precision, right? Like he has inconsistent hand placement, arriving at the second level, blocking targets while being out of control. So like he can't bring himself to gather himself to block the linebacker when he gets there. Rising at the snap level. my last note was I worry that his issues are not just that he's a raw prospect. And I point out he's played 1,000+ snaps at offensive tackle in college, while Amarius Mims only played 800. But that his other issue is that he just needs to be better at paying attention to details, right? Like that you need to be more that's the difference between being offensive line and defensive line, is that you have to pay attention to details and do the technique correct. Where does he win? Mirror athleticism, unanswered questions. Is he still learning, or is he skipping the details and just, trying to be a little more reactive than technical when he's playing the game?
So I remember listening to a podcast before the Senior Bowl, and I apologize, I don't remember what podcast it was on, but Jim Nagy, the director of the Senior Bowl, was talking about Guyton. He said, Guyton has all of the talent to be a top 10 pick. And there's some teams that think he could be the next Tyron Smith in the NFL. But the most important part of the pre-draft process for him is meeting with the teams and trying to get a read on what makes him tick. And I think as you were talking, like, that just kind of clicked, like, does he want to be great? And this is the difference between like Tyler Smith and other prospects, where Tyler Smith was raw coming out of Tulsa, but the Cowboys believed in his work ethic and his personality so much that they thought it would get better because he would work so hard. That's another reason the Cowboys really like Terrence Steele, right? And why they were so committed to letting Terrence Steele play right tackle, even over Lyle Collins, who was way more naturally gifted than Terrence Steele. I'm not saying I know about Tyler Guyton. I'm just being clear, but to me, that's probably the one thing that we won't know before the draft, because if he had some of the Tyler Smith like off the field personality and the want to, then sign me up for this guy all day long at pick 24. If that's the case. Yeah,
absolutely. And I also think the other thing, is that perspective is important here, because I think that, I like Mims and Fatanu a lot more. I think we'll talk about that in a second, but that I would be thrilled to get those two guys at 24. I would be still very happy to get Guyton at 24. And I think that's the thing, is that for me, Mims and Fatanu will fall to 24. Guyton is a very solid pick at 24.
That's probably where she should be drafted, is around.
Yeah, and which is great. Like, if you take him there at 24, that's great. That's still appropriate value. It's just that I hope those other two guys fall to us. It doesn't mean that doesn't need to be a slight against Tyler Guyton.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. So stack these three players for you in terms of how you would like the Cowboys to draft him. Is it Mims, Fatanu, Guyton?
I think so. I don't know. It's tough because I have a lot more confidence that I think Fatanu will make it, right, than Mims. I think Mims has some boom or bust to him, right? Yeah. But I think that you're betting on a huge upside there with Mims, and Mims may have as much physical upside as any prospect in this entire class, period.
I struggle with this one. I probably would go Mims, Fatanu, Guyton, but there is part of me that just feels like Fatanu is such a safe player because of all the snaps that he has. Because
you can play him anywhere too. You can put him wherever you want, and
that's what makes me feel. Yeah,
yeah,
and it's what makes me feel comfortable. Like, the Cowboys want to stick him at left guard and pair him and Tyler Smith together. Like, great. I think that's going to really work. If you want to eventually have him kick out to right tackle, I think that would work as well. So I think he's the safest of the three. I think Mims has the highest ceiling, and Guyton remains one of the most perplexing players in this draft for me.
Yeah, and I think, again, Guyton is a weird combination of an upside but high floor but low ceiling player. So
it's weird.
I think he's just kind of a unique player, and really he's one of these guys, like we said. I would love to have listened to his interview before I kind of knew where I was drafting, because I think, like I said, his play mentality, his work ethic, I think is going to feed a lot to his draft grade.
All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. Go check out the channel on YouTube. We post videos every single day over there. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Go follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus _Mosier, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.